all afraid of. I mean, there's old people, young people waking up in the morning and all they've got on their mind is what's happening in this country, what's happening to us.
Over 40,000 paramedics have walked out, and 61 emergency zones across the UK have collapsed. This is not a blip. It's not a warning. It's a full-scale operational failure, and the government is still clinging to statements like the situation is under control. Let's stop pretending. Paramedics didn't suddenly decide to abandon their post for fun. They left because the zones they are being asked to serve are now hostile, because they are being blocked, harassed, surrounded, and in some cases, with tensions rising across the UK and thousands taking to the streets of London right now, it's more important than ever to see the full picture. If you want to stay updated on the situation as it unfolds, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. I'm covering the angles the mainstream media might miss, like this video if you believe in unfiltered reporting. Physically attacked while trying to do their jobs. They've been warning for years. The threat wasn't just to patient outcomes, it was to their own lives. Now they've had enough. And they've walked. This isn't about pay. It's not about hours. This is about safety, about the physical and psychological reality of entering neighborhoods that are increasingly being described as no-go zones by emergency services themselves. And the result? The system is buckling. Calls are being rerouted. Zones are being downgraded. Routes that were once standard are now flagged as inaccessible. Emergency teams are triple-checking whether it's even safe to respond before dispatching units. And while officials keep insisting that coverage is stable, internal dispatch logs tell a very different story. We're talking about response times that have tripled, about critical calls being bounced between regions, not because of traffic, but because no one can guarantee that a crew will make it there safely. That's not sustainable. That's not even functional. And at the heart of it all is something bigger than logistics. This isn't just an operational failure. It's a socio-political one. The front line is breaking down because trust is broken down. Rising violence, overcrowded migrant housing, social unrest, tensions boiling over in communities that already feel stretched, neglected, and abandoned. That pressure doesn't stay inside. It spills into the streets, into the routes paramedics have to navigate, into the homes they are asked to enter without backup. And let's be clear, this isn't just a matter of community disputes. These are full-scale breakdowns of the social contract. Emergency services only work when there's enough baseline trust and cooperation to allow responders to do their job. That's what's gone. The internal reports say it plainly. This isn't temporary. This isn't under control. It's degrading hour by hour. Each disruption stacks on top of the last, creating a vicious cycle of delays, walkouts, and more zones falling off the map. And the psychological toll? It's already here. Crews are questioning whether it's even ethical to keep showing up. I know things feel really heavy in the UK right now. There's a lot of division and noise on the streets, but I want this channel to be a place where we can come together. If you want to be part of a supportive community, please subscribe. And like this video to show some love to everyone feeling anxious about the state of things right now. Stay safe out there, everyone. Knowing the system is patchwork at best and actively dangerous at worst. And when responders start having to choose between their own safety and their duty, that's when you know the line has already been crossed. It's easy to talk about resilience from behind a press podium. But if you're not the one entering these hostile zones, if you're not the one being screamed at while trying to save someone's life, then resilience is just a word. This is no longer a crisis you can explain away with stats and sound bites. This is a collapsing structure held together by temporary reroutes and institutional denial. And that denial? It's what's making everything worse. Because the government knows. Internal documents, frontline reports, dispatch logs, they all point to the same thing. The system is breaking. And instead of addressing the root causes, violence, overcrowding, political neglect, they are spinning narratives that don't hold up under scrutiny. There's a real cost to that. While ministers tell the press everything's under control, real people are waiting for help that isn't coming. They are dying in that delay. They are trapped in zones that responders won't enter. They are relying on systems that the front line has already marked as unsafe. And the scariest part? This is just the beginning. If the spiral continues, we could soon be looking at entire regions without functioning emergency coverage. Not because the ambulances aren't there, but because there's no one left willing to drive them into danger. Let's not underestimate what that means. If emergency services go offline, public safety becomes fragmented. Some communities will take matters into their own hands. Some will retreat. Some will descend into further unrest. But one thing is guaranteed. Without reliable emergency response, everyone is less safe. This is what a societal fracture looks like. You can't fix it with more software. You can't patch it with overnight policy changes. You have to confront the real drivers, the breakdown in trust between the state and the street, between responders and the communities they serve, between the front line and the officials who claim to represent them. And yet, leadership is still silent on the real issues, still dodging any mention of social fragmentation, policy failure, or the role of overcrowding and unrest in fueling this crisis. The emergency response system wasn't built for this level of instability, and it shows. Crews are stretched thin, command structures are overloaded, and the feedback loop is brutal. Every hour of inaction now creates a longer recovery window later. Let's talk numbers again. 40,000 paramedics have walked. 61 emergency zones downgraded. You've seen the headlines, but the atmosphere down here is completely different. Subscribe so you don't miss the raw footage I'm releasing later this week, and like this video to help push this unfiltered reporting up the algorithm. Countless calls rerouted. Those aren't indicators of a system under strain. They're signs of one in open collapse. And it's not just about the people who've walked. It's the ones still trying to hold the line. They're working with fewer colleagues, longer shifts, more danger, and zero reassurance from above. How long do you think they'll last? Because that's a final cliff edge, when the ones who haven't left finally say, that's enough. And at that point, it's not just a health emergency. It's a full public safety crisis with national implications. There's still time to intervene, but not with platitudes, not with surface-level fixes. This needs direct acknowledgement, structural intervention, and a complete overhaul of the way emergency response is supported, staffed, and protected. If that doesn't happen, then we'll look back on this walkout not as a crisis itself, but as a last warning before the collapse became permanent. Thanks for watching. If you think more people need to know what's happening behind the headlines, hit like. Share this video so it reaches the people who still think the system's fine. And if you've experienced this crisis up close, tell us in the comments. We read everyone. And if you want to stay ahead of the stories no one in power want to talk about, subscribe. We're not done following this. Not by a long shot. Let's not lie to ourselves. This is a system spiraling. And the more we pretend it's just workforce disruption, the more we ignore the reality of what's breaking down around us. This isn't about one bad week. It's not a protest you can outwait. Over 40,000 paramedics didn't walk off because of a minor inconvenience. They didn't abandon 61 emergency zones over a scheduling disagreement. They walked because they no longer feel protected, because the job they were trained to do, save lives, has been hijacked by conditions no one signed up for. And here's what's really hard to swallow. Their right to walk. They've been pushed into a corner, into zones where the basic safety protocols don't apply anymore, where the idea of emergency response means rolling into hostile environments with no backup, no guarantee of a safe exit, and no confidence that anyone at the top even sees what they are dealing with. The government's line has been, services are under pressure, but holding. But holding for how long? Because according to internal reports, the holding is being done with duct tape and sheer willpower. Response times have tripled. Crews are being rerouted endlessly, wasting precious minutes that people don't have. And in some cases, they are skipping entire locations because dispatch logs have marked them too dangerous to enter. Let that sink in. People are dying in areas that ambulances can't access. Not because of traffic, with tensions rising across the UK and thousands taking to the streets of London right now. It's more important than ever to see the full picture. If you want to stay updated on the situation as it unfolds, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. I'm covering the angles the mainstream media might miss, like this video if you believe in unfiltered reporting. Not because of resource shortages, but because the route has been declared a risk zone, because responders have been attacked, blocked, and swarmed trying to save people. And still, officials are acting like this is all a matter of resource optimization. It's not. It's a public safety meltdown. And worse, it's a deliberately downplayed one. They don't want to call it what it is because that would mean acknowledging the real problem. This is a societal crisis rooted in breakdowns they've ignored for years. Violence, housing instability, community unrest, social fragmentation. This crisis didn't just show up on the doorstep. It was built, brick by brick, over time, through austerity, through policy neglect, through repeated failure to invest in community stability. Now, emergency services are left to carry the weight of all of it, and they are collapsing under that pressure. Because this isn't what emergency response was designed for. Paramedics aren't riot control. They are not security guards. They are medical professionals. And yet, they are being asked to operate in conditions that resemble active conflict zones more than healthcare environments. You don't solve that with better triage apps or faster dispatch systems. You solve that by restoring safety, by protecting crews, by confronting the actual conditions on the ground instead of hiding behind spreadsheets. Right now, though, what we're seeing is a political strategy based on denial. The belief that if they don't name the crisis, the public won't notice. But people are already noticing. They are calling for ambulances that don't come. They are hearing that their neighborhood is now classed unsafe. They are seeing first responders vanish, and no one stepping in to explain why. This creates a vacuum of trust. And once that trust is gone, it doesn't just damage emergency services. It damages the entire relationship between citizens and the institutions meant to protect them. And here's the scariest part. We are inching closer to a point where the emergency response network becomes functionally unusable in some areas. Not just stretched thin, not just delayed, unusable. You call, but no one comes. Not because no one cares, but because the system has crumbled in silence. And yes, this is about paramedics, but it doesn't end there. These failures cascade. Every delayed ambulance affects hospital intake. Every missed response overloads the next zone. Every walkout strains police, fire, and mental health support systems. One failure bleeds into the next until no one can function properly. I know things feel really heavy in the UK right now. There's a lot of division and noise on the streets, but I want this channel to be a place where we can come together. If you want to be part of a supportive community, please subscribe. And like this video to show some love to everyone feeling anxious about the state of things right now. Stay safe out there, everyone. We're already seeing signs of the spiral. The internal documents don't hold back. Dispatchers are noting repeat delays in the same areas. Safe zones are shrinking. And responders themselves are logging psychological stress levels that suggest burnout across the board. Let's be clear. This isn't about blaming communities either. People living in overcrowded, unstable conditions didn't create this crisis. But when no one steps in to mediate tensions, to provide resources, to bridge gap between residents and responders, what do you think happens? Tensions escalate, incidents rise, trust dissolves, and eventually, the people who are supposed to respond to danger become the targets of it. That's a tragic part. Both sides are losing. Communities are being left without medical support. Emergency workers are being forced to abandon their mission, and the people in power? Nowhere to be found. It's all playing out in silence, behind closed doors, in leaked memos, in statistics you won't hear at press briefings. And the only consistent message from leadership has been this: we have it under control. Controlled how? With tripled response times, with 61 downgraded zones, with thousands of frontline staff refusing to enter entire neighborhoods. There's no control here. There's collapse. Just very carefully managed collapse, with enough PR buffers to keep the headlines calm. For now. But you can only spin dysfunction for so long. Eventually, reality catches up. And when it does, the fallout won't be subtle. It'll be felt by every citizen who thought the safety net would be there when they needed it most. So let's not wait until the day a national press conference has to admit the truth everyone on the ground already knows, that the emergency response system in Britain has degraded to the point of failure, and that it's not coming back unless something radical changes. What needs to happen is straightforward, but difficult. First, acknowledge that this is no longer a workforce dispute. It's a full-blown socio-political emergency. Then, protect the people we rely on, not with platitudes, but with actual policy. Guarantee safety for responders. Fund protective measures. Equip crews for the new reality instead of pretending the old one still exists. Most of all, address the social drivers. Violence, unrest, overcrowding. These didn't arise in a vacuum. You can't throw paramedics into hostile zones and act shocked when they push back. If none of that happens, then this crisis doesn't just continue. You've seen the headlines, but the atmosphere down here is completely different. Subscribe so you don't miss the raw footage I'm releasing later this week, and like this video to help push this unfiltered reporting up the algorithm. It accelerates. Zones don't get restored. More workers leave. The public grows more anxious. Mistrust deepens. And at some point, people stop calling for help altogether because they've already learned. No one's coming. Let's keep going, because this doesn't stop at 40,000 paramedics walking out. That number is a symptom. The collapse of 61 emergency zones is a fallout. But the real problem, the one no one wants to touch, is the growing disconnect between the people on the front lines and the people calling the shots. This is a state-level emergency, and leadership is still pretending it's a service hiccup. Let's break it down. When you have thousands of highly trained professionals saying we cannot do our job safely anymore, and the only response is a press release saying services are being restructured, what message does that send? Not just to the public, but to everyone still hanging on in the system. It says, we see you, but we're not going to do anything about it. That kind of silence isn't neutral. It's corrosive. It's how systems rot from the inside. You don't need a dramatic shutdown to cause a crisis. You just need enough people quietly losing faith. That's where we are. This crisis is now less about operational strain and more about mass disillusionment. And once that takes hold, fixing logistics won't be enough. Because the people who left aren't just tired, they are traumatized. They've been asked to show up in conditions that would never be tolerated in any other public-facing profession. And they did, for years, until they couldn't anymore. Let's go back to those 61 collapse zones for a second. That's not just a reshuffling of resources. That's dozens of communities now marked by emergency services as functionally unstable. That means blocked routes, hostile crowds, unsafe entry points. Paramedics being told, you may not come back from this call safely. You can't patch that with staffing adjustments. You can't talk your way out of it with media appearances. Because this isn't just about the presence or absence of ambulances. It's about trust. It's about whether the public believes help will arrive, and whether the responders believe they'll be protected while trying to deliver that help. Right now, both of those beliefs are eroding, fast. And when you combine that with social unrest, housing issues, rising hostility, and unchecked violence, what you have is a full-spectrum breakdown, not just of services, but of relationships, between responders and communities, between workers and leadership, between institutions and the people they are supposed to serve. You can't send people into chaos, pretend it's normal, and expect the system to function. But that's exactly what's been happening. The people in charge have treated this like a PR problem. Keep the messaging clean. Deny the scale. Hope the next news cycle moves on. Except it hasn't. Because this isn't just another scandal. It's structural. It's ongoing. And it's getting worse every single week that nothing changes. And here's the uncomfortable part. The public is starting to adapt to failure. They are learning what it means when a zone is downgraded. They are bracing for delays. They are hesitating before calling for help. Not because they don't need it, but because they are unsure it will even come. That's not resilience. That's resignation. And that's what collapse really looks like. It's not loud. It's not dramatic. It's quiet. It's invisible. It's thousands of individual decisions made every day. By workers who walk out because they feel unsafe, and by citizens who stop expecting the system to catch them. And meanwhile, the people who cause this with years of neglect, denial, and deflection are nowhere to be found. Always, they are still out front claiming it's all under control. The documents say otherwise. Internal dispatch logs show tripled response times, rerouted calls that don't reach anyone in time, crews logging in and flagging entire streets as high-risk zones. And the worst part? This isn't being treated as urgent. There's no national emergency response team, no new framework, no public reckoning, just carefully managed talking points in the hope that the system won't fully collapse before the next election cycle. That's not leadership. That's abandonment. And let's stop pretending this is just happening in rough areas. That narrative is lazy and dangerous. Because when the system starts degrading, no area is immune. The reroutes, the delays, the worker shortages, those ripple outward. Even zones that are currently stable are being overwhelmed. Everyone is downstream from collapse. So even if this isn't your postcode today, it could be soon. And if the people at the top continue to refuse to name the real causes, if they keep dodging the links between rising social disorder, systemic underfunding, and policy denial, then this won't just stay a crisis in emergency services. It'll become a crisis of governance. Because once the public believes that the state can't protect its own responders, the next logical conclusion is that it can't protect them either. That's when fear takes hold. That's when people start opting out. Not just from emergency systems, but from social cooperation altogether. They stop engaging. They stop cooperating. They turn inward. And eventually, they stop trusting anything coming from official channels. We are closer to that than anyone wants to admit. That's why this isn't just about ambulances or response times. It's about the long-term viability of public institutions. It's about whether people still believe in the concept of shared safety. And right now, that belief is hanging by a thread. So what would real action look like? It would start with a national admission of failure. No spin. No talking points. Just a clear acknowledgement that the system is not functioning and hasn't been for some time. Then, immediate investment in responder safety. Not token measures. Not vague promises. But actual structural protection. Secure routes. Escorted entries. Crisis-trained support staff. And most importantly, listening, really listening, to what paramedics have been saying for years. Because this isn't the first warning. It's just the one we can't ignore anymore. And if that doesn't happen, then we're headed for something much worse than delayed ambulances. We're headed for collapse in public confidence that will take years to rebuild. The walkouts aren't the beginning of the crisis. They are the moment it boiled over. And if we let this moment pass with nothing more than political theater and half measures, then we deserve the consequences that follow. So ask yourself, what happens when the system breaks completely? What happens when the next emergency zone fails and no one's left to fill the gap? Because that's not theoretical. That's a trajectory. It's already written in dispatch logs, frontline reports, and internal assessments. All that's left now is whether anyone in power will act before it's too late. All right, let's bring this full circle. We started with 40,000 paramedics walking out. We've tracked the fallout across 61 collapse emergency zones. We've unpacked the hostile conditions, the rerouted calls, the skyrocketing response times, and the silent leadership hoping this will all blow over. But here's where it gets even more sobering. This isn't just a crisis of present. It's a collapse that's reshaping the future. Because even if paramedics were to return tomorrow, even if the downgraded zones were somehow reinstated overnight, the damage is already done. Trust doesn't bounce back that quickly. Morale doesn't rebound with a memo. And a system that's been exposed as fragile doesn't just regain stability with a fresh PR campaign. What's been broken here is confidence. On both sides. Communities that already felt abandoned are now being told, without words but through action, that they are too dangerous to save. And responders who once believed they were backed by the state are now crystal clear. When it came time to choose between their safety and saving face, the government picked optics. That's what makes this crisis so much deeper than the raw numbers. Because we're now seeing a generation of emergency workers who are disillusioned, who've seen the worst of what the job can become, and realize the people at the top will not protect them from it. And those workers, they're not just walking away from their posts. They're walking away from careers, from institutions, from a system they no longer trust. And you can't just hire your way out of that. You can't fill 40,000 gaps with trainees and hope no one notices the experience is gone. You can't replace institutional knowledge. You can't fast-track street-level wisdom. And you can't fake the kind of resilience that's only built after years on the job, especially in a climate this volatile. So yes, the response time delays are terrifying. The inaccessible zones are urgent. But what's happening beneath that is even more dangerous. The erosion of the very foundation emergency services rely on. People willing to risk their life for others because they believe in the system. That belief? It's cracked. Maybe permanently. Let's say someone does intervene. Tomorrow. Let's say there's an emergency summit, new funding, full-scale national acknowledgement. Even in that best-case scenario, it's going to take years to rebuild what's been lost. Because you can't rebuild trust with the same silence that broke it. And let's not forget the public side of this equation. Ordinary people are absorbing this reality. They are seeing that emergency coverage is no longer guaranteed. They are seeing that geography now determines whether you get help. They are watching a system that once promised fairness, regardless of who you are or where you live, slowly retreat behind invisible borders. Borders marked by risk assessments, crowd hostility, and internal memos stamped "Do not enter." And that changes behavior. People in affected zones are learning that help might not come. They are adjusting expectations. They are turning to alternatives. Some communities are organizing their own response networks. Others are falling into silence, resigned to the fact that emergency services have left them behind. You think that doesn't shift the balance of power? It absolutely does. Because when the state pulls back, other forces step in. Sometimes it's local leaders or volunteers. Sometimes it's not. And in that vacuum, the definition of safety becomes unstable, unequal, negotiable. That's where this is heading. We're not just looking at a broken ambulance system. We're looking at the potential disintegration of a core pillar of civil society, the idea that someone will come when you call for help. That's not dramatic. That's the direction of the data. Internal logs show missed calls piling up. Dispatch teams are flagging locations they once considered standard. Coordinators are writing openly that the current model is unsustainable. The word collapse isn't being whispered, it's being written. And the government? Still performing stability. Still giving the same reassurances while the floor gives out. We've heard everything is manageable. We've heard services remain operational. But you can't operationalize dysfunction. You can't manage the unmanageable. And at some point, the performance becomes part of the failure. Because if leadership is more invested in denying the problem than solving it, they become complicit in the collapse. There's no version of this where silence is neutral. Every day of inaction is another day the spiral deepens. Every non-response is a message to the public and to responders that this system is on its own. And when enough people start acting like the system is gone, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So what comes next? It depends entirely on whether anyone is willing to treat this for what it really is, a crisis of safety, trust, and political will. Not a staffing glitch, not a seasonal uptick, but a warning flare from the front line of a country's emergency backbone. The wargate wasn't the breaking point. It was a confirmation that the break already happened. And now, it's a question of how far this is allowed to fall before someone steps in with something real. If you're watching this, you probably already know the truth. You've seen the signs. Maybe you've called for help and waited too long. Maybe you've watched someone else wait. Maybe you know a responder who's walked, or one who stayed and now wishes they hadn't. These aren't abstract problems anymore. This is a lived reality for thousands of people. And it's growing. Let's finish what needs to be said. Because even after everything, the wargates, the downgraded zones, the triple-length response times, there's still this eerie, persistent silence at the top. No national address. No emergency briefing. Just a slow drip of vague statements that feel designed to reassure headlines, not people. But no matter how carefully the narrative is managed, the reality is still bleeding through. Communities know something's wrong. They feel it when they call for help and wait too long. They feel it when they are told the ambulance is on its way, but it never arrives. They feel it when responders used to be a symbol of safety, and now they are a target, or simply absent. And yet, for some reason, the government still thinks this can be contained, that this is just bad optics, a difficult news cycle, something that'll pass. But this isn't passing. It's progressing. The latest internal reports are brutal. Routes deemed inaccessible. Crews reporting dangerous crowd encounters daily. Some zones aren't just unstable. They're effectively cut off. Dispatchers are working with shrinking maps. Calls are being triaged with questions that now include, can we get in safely, before they even consider urgency. That's how you know it's broken. When the primary question isn't what's wrong with the patient, but what are we risking just to get there? And here's the thing, this isn't just about those emergency zones. Because for every place marked as high risk, the surrounding areas absorb the pressure. That's how collapse works. It doesn't stay in the epicenter. It spreads outward. So yes, Even if you live in a zone that's still technically covered, that doesn't mean you're protected, because your ambulance might now be covering 2 zones. Your nearest crew might already be stretched beyond capacity. Your response time might have doubled, and you just haven't needed to call yet. It's a false sense of stability, and when it finally fails, it'll feel sudden. But it's not. It's been building this whole time, quietly, steadily, invisibly, under the surface of a system that's been asked to do too much, with too little, for far too long. The workers saw it first, and they tried to say something. And when no one listened, they walked. And what was the government's answer? Nothing. No shift in strategy. No re-evaluation. Just more denial. More silence. More distance between the people giving orders and the people risking their lives to carry them out. If that doesn't scare you, it should. Because if emergency responders, people trained to keep calm in absolute chaos, are saying, "We can't do this anymore," what does that tell you about where we are? What does it say that the people we relied on to save lives are now the ones begging to be heard, warning us that the system itself is a threat? And if we don't listen now, what's next? We're already watching trust unravel. Between responders and government, between public and services, between neighbor and neighbor. Because when you don't know whether help will come, you start to think differently. You worry. You prepare for the worst. You hesitate to rely on anyone but yourself. That is how social cohesion breaks down. Not with riots, not with speeches, with silence, with slow, invisible loss, with a quiet, creeping realization that the safety net doesn't exist anymore. And once enough people believe that, we stop living in a community and start surviving in a vacuum. That's why this matters. That's why it's not just about the paramedics. It's about the signal their walkout sends. It says, we're not okay. It says, we don't feel protected. It says, the system you trust has already collapsed on us. And if nothing changes, it's coming for you next. So here we are. The warnings are loud. The documents are clear. The front line is speaking out. The response from the top is silence. You don't have to accept that. So don't. Talk about it. Share this with someone who still thinks the ambulance is always coming. Share it with someone who hasn't realized how deep this goes. Like the video so it rises above the noise. Leave a comment with what you've seen, whether you're a responder, a dispatcher, or just someone who's been left waiting too long. And subscribe if you're done being lied to about what's under control. We'll keep watching, because this isn't just a system failure. It's a test of how far a country can fall before someone finally tells the truth.